Within the Imperium, there is often a very strict chain of command for doing things, both military and civilian. The Inquisition especially has an iron grip and a keen eye over everything, but there are some things even seemingly beyond their authority to control or access. Such an example of this can be found in the group we explore today, an element of the Adeptus Astartes whose records are so sealed and hidden that the Inquisition doesn't even have access to them, or at the very least has a rather hard time getting said access. They're an interesting bunch even beyond their hidden history, as their modus operandi is one of overwhelming force, almost always operating at pretty much full strength, with excellent equipment and resources even beyond the typical Space Marine chapter. Hailing from the 21st Cursed founding in M36, they're a fleet-based chapter of Primogenitor Unknown. Led by the brazen warlord Asterion Moloch from their flagship Daedalus crater, they are the Minotaurs, and this is what we know of them. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. Despite officially being founded in M36, there are records of a chapter under the name Minotaurs all the way back in M32. But whether this reference is to the ancestors of the modern one is unknown, and it may just be the name was recycled millennia later. Regardless, official records state that the Minotaurs were founded in either the very last years of M35 or the first few of M36 in the 21st founding, the largest since the second founding after the Horus Heresy that saw the original division of the Legiones Astartes into chapters. It is said that the 21st founding was tasked with the improvement of Gene Seed, small surprise given some of the deficiencies found within it, but most know it instead as the Cursed founding due to the horrendous luck of those chapters created in it. Names such as the Firehawks, Lamenters, and Flame Falcons all come from this founding, and those who know the Astartes history will know those chapters certainly didn't have the best of times. With colleagues like that, the Minotaurs have had a much better history, though it is rather shrouded. For example, we don't know who their primogenitor chapter was, and thus which Primarch they are descended from. They might know, even if they don't. Unlike the Blood Ravens we explored recently, they don't make a big deal about seeking it out. There is practically no evidence pertaining to who their Primarch might be. The Greek nomenclature and iconography might suggest the Ultramarines, but their specialisms lead toward the Imperial Fist, or even especially the Black Templars. There is no tangible link, though, between them and the Sons of Dawn. Even if there were, however, I'm not sure one of the founding chapters would want to be associated with the Minotaurs, as the chapter have quite the unsavoury reputation within the Adeptus Astartes and are a source of concern for the Inquisition. The Ultramarines in particular have fallen foul of the Minotaurs in recent times, with Chapter Master Manius Calgar being slurred by the chapter and the Inceptor's successor chapter being nearly wiped out by them. The Minotaurs are now barred from Ultramar, and the Sons of Guilliman have sworn vengeance on them, so let's hope they didn't have plans on joining up with Guilliman in this new era, eh? This distrust of the Minotaurs by other Imperial forces has pretty much been around since their inception, due to what may or may not be the quirk that the Cursed founding blessed them with. The Minotaurs are, for want of a better word, berserkers. Quite how berserker they get on a scale of 1 to Angron is a little less clear, but it would cause the Minotaurs to engage foes to the point of annihilation and often disregard the typical chain of command in the prosecution of this. Even when they did stick to orders, they were often distant from their allies, so it is little surprise that they were particularly unlikable. However, there is one group to whom the Minotaurs were always utterly devoted, even so far as to follow their commands if they flew in the face of protocol and other orders. You might expect this group to be Inquisition, as they do have a rather short leash on some chapters, but no, it's believed to be none other than the High Lords of Terror who pull the strings on the Minotaurs. Why the Senator of Imperialis decided it wanted to have direct influence over some of the Adeptus Astartes is unknown, because it's not like the Minotaurs openly act as their symbol of authority or anything like that on campaign, but at the same time, why are the Minotaurs the only ones in this position if the High Lords want their own sort of personal army? I suspect to find out we'd need access to the history of the Minotaurs, which, well, is no easy feat. The records are there, but they're locked away under incredibly tight seals, And when I say tight, I mean it. Even the upper echelons of the Inquisition have trouble accessing them. Whatever the reason behind these circumstances, though it isn't broadly obvious to the casual observer, there are those who note the immediate diligence to High Lord orders that the Minotaurs have. This ignorance of the typical bureaucracy and command chain within the Imperium is actually of great concern to the Order Hereticus. I guess the Inquisitor mindset goes something like, if it has free will beyond our control, it's probably a heretic. The Imperium, everybody. Their history is rather scattered too, even the parts accessible. After their not inception in M32 and their official creation in M36, they did their thing for a while as kind of just another chapter before disappearing from records in M38. They then didn't show their face or make their presence known again until M41, at which point they went on to super annoy the Ultramarines and cement their reputation. At this current moment, however, they might be regretting the hostility they've engendered from their allies. Sometime after the appearance of the Cicatrix Maledictum, a force of Death Guard was able to infiltrate and attack the chapter's fortress monastery. The Sons of Mortari lost, perhaps obviously since the Minotaurs are, well, still alive, but they dealt irreversible damage and tainted the gene seed of the chapter. This means the Minotaurs are now desperately low on numbers, and I doubt they'll be receiving Primaris reinforcement given their reputation amongst the Scions of Guilliman, so they're believed to be beelining for Terra in an attempt to get new gene seed before they go extinct for good. As far as we're aware, the organisation of the Minotaurs follows the strictures of the Codex Astartes pretty closely. Certainly the chapter have no additional or otherwise unique companies or positions within their ranks. Their chaplaincy, librarian and such all seem to be, for the most part, pretty in line with the original tome that Guilliman penned all those millennia ago. However, there is a rather strange quirk when it comes to their numbers and their recruitment. Rather like their seeming adherence to the High Lords over all others, it is not something that can be noticed in passing or without encountering the Minotaurs multiple times, but is instead a conclusion drawn over the course of many campaigns, or years, or both. For some odd reason, the Minotaurs always seem to be at or around full strength, as evidenced by the fact that they will show up to most campaigns as an entire full-strength chapter, rather than as individual companies where possible. It should be stressed that said strength is still, to our knowledge, 1,000 Astartes. This isn't a Black Templars type situation where they're always spread out in massive numbers. As we said previously, they do seem to follow the Codex. How such a, relatively speaking at least, minor chapter is able to do this is rather remarkable, as even the first and second founding chapters with hugely more numerous recruiting pools and resources go through periods with lower numbers. See, for example, after the Battle for Macragge. This is especially strange and special, given the Minotaurs don't even have a home world to draw from on a regular basis. They're fleet-based, and so they must get their recruits from elsewhere. There is, however, a solution to this that has been encountered by observers during an event known as the Antagonist Campaign. Though they have no recruiting worlds that we know of, the Minotaurs seem to have no trouble picking up new recruits from somewhere, and can quickly elevate those neophytes they do take on to become full-fledged Astartes. And when I say quickly, I do mean quickly. I don't have a timescale, sadly, and to be honest, there's only so much leeway the organs of an Astartes will give you time-wise, but it's said to be remarkably fast versus other chapters and involve a lot of brain surgery and indoctrination on top. We don't know quite what the surgery does beyond typical Astartes modifications, but their berserker nature makes me draw some rather scary parallels to a certain traitor legion back in the day, even if they don't use anything like the Butcher's Nails, which obviously they couldn't. That technology's pretty much not understood anymore. Just makes me a little concerned is all. However, this leaves one question. Where do they get this seemingly massive stream of endless reinforcement from? Well, if we run with the idea that they have some sort of patronage from the Senatorum Imperialis, it makes a measure of sense that the High Lords can pretty much levy whoever they want to reinforce the Minotaurs should the need arise. Still not convinced by the whole High Lords thing? I don't blame you. Let's look at the Minotaurs' armoury and other equipment, see if I can convince you there. As already stated, the Minotaurs are fleet-based, but unlike most chapters of this type, their flagship is much more than a battle barge or the typical Astartes vessel. Instead, the Minotaurs have the Daedalus Crater, a relic ship classed as a heavy assault carrier. Sadly, we don't have much idea of what class that falls into, but as the other known class of carrier vessel is effectively a modified Emperor-class battleship, we might be looking at a ship on par with the Eternal Crusader or other Gloriana-class ships, and thus amongst the most powerful Space Marine vessels of all. Obviously, we're making a lot of assumptions there, we're not sure. Such is the power of the crater, its teleportarium can transport 31 Terminators and 2 Contemptor Dreadnoughts at once, and that's at least, it could be more. And the ship is also armed with a bombardment cannon common to battle barges that allows it to work at range and up close thanks to its bucket loads of boarding torpedoes. As if that wasn't enough, part of the vessel's permanent garrison includes a group known as the Hecator. Hecaton, named sort of after giants of Greek myth that guarded the gates of Tartarus, part of the underworld where the sinners are punished. Though how much of that the Minotaurs know, I'm unsure. It's ancient Terran mythology, it's probably been forgotten. Unlike their mythical counterparts, there are more than 3 Hecaton, which are in fact Contemptor pattern dreadnoughts and thus incredibly rarely seen generally, as knowledge of their construction is so closely guarded, it may well have been lost. And yet the Minotaurs, they have at least 10 of these dreadnoughts, said to all be relics of an age before they were even founded. What gives with that, unless they got them from some very restricted forges or from some very special patrons? Outside of their stupidly powerful flagship and the cadre of dreadnoughts they've no right to own, the Minotaurs are still ridiculously well equipped. The majority of their power arm is either the newest, Primaris aside, Mark 8 Errant armor, or the ancient Mark III Iron armor from the Horus Heresy. As Mark 7 was the standard by the time of their founding, and Mark 8 is still quite rare, I'm left with my above argument of special patrons and restricted forges to try and explain it. Further compounding their inexplicable access to resources they shouldn't have is their use of rare Tartarus and Arcanak pattern Terminator armor, the former being Heresy-era relics and the latter being almost unheard of outside of the Minotaurs. Their vehicle pool is also rather impressive, boasting a large number of powerful tanks, including the indomitable Spartan assault tank and the Storm Eagle gunship. Though both of these vehicles are best known from the 31st millennium, they do remain in some service today, and the Storm Eagle's even seeing a pickup in popularity for some reason if a chapter is favoured by the Mechanicus. We have no knowledge of whether the Minotaurs are, but given the Fabricator General is often the High Lord, I wouldn't be that surprised. The variant used by the chapter is known as the Rock pattern, trading transport capacity for tank hunting weaponry in its usually anti-personnel Vengeance launcher. If I haven't convinced you, I still don't blame you, it's still a tenuous link, but you can certainly see why people get the idea that they follow the High Lords of Terror, can't you? Due to their extended absence from the galactic stage, there are not a huge number of battles involving the Minotaurs, but those that are certainly rather insightful. Though their presence there is a contradiction, there were a force of Minotaurs deployed as part of the Solar Rebellion in M32, alongside other Astartes chapters including the just as infamous Carcharodons. The forces of Chaos have caused a series of uprisings across a swathe of Western Segmentum Solar, and either through numbers or the presence of heretic Astartes, the Loyalists did take heavy losses. That said, they were actually able to see it through, and though the fates of those rebellious worlds are unknown, the presence of both Minotaurs, if it is the right ones, and the Carcharodons makes me worry for their populace, loyal or not. Of course, it may be that the Minotaurs in that war are nothing to do with the ones we know today, in which case the first known battle for the chapter came in M37 during the 8th Black Crusade. This battle happened in the Andromax system, which had recently been conquered by a force of the Iron Warriors and Night Lords, and actually saw a force of Adeptus Custodes get involved in the fighting. The Custodians themselves managed to get the war started in the first place after the traitor occupation, playing to the ego of the Mechanicus' Fabricator General in order to secure Martian aid in the fight. We're unsure quite why the Minotaurs were brought in on top of the Mechanicus and Custodian force. Yes, as much as we all thought the Custodians never left Terra Pre-Gilman, it turns out they did. But my assumption is that as the Custodian Captain General and the Fabricator General can be High Lords of Terror, they simply pulled those strings that we seem to think they have on the Minotaurs. Regardless, with such a powerful force present, it is no surprise that the Andromax system was routed and reclaimed, though even if it hadn't, the Administratum would have said it was, because it's actually heresy to record the Custodians as losing. The more you know. There are no other recorded incidents involving the Minotaurs before their M38 disappearance, but when they returned, it was as a part of the Macarian heresy. Following the death/assassination of Lord Solar Macarius, his generals fell to fighting amongst themselves for his conquered territory. The Minotaurs were heavily involved in the 70-year-long crusade to reclaim said territory, destroying rebels on Syros Prime, hunting down Xenos-possessed Astartes, yes that's a thing, on the ocean world Nereus, and enacting exterminatus across potentially an entire cluster. It was also at this time that the Euxine incident took place, the one with the Inceptors chapter I mentioned earlier. After the Inceptors and the Doom Warriors chapters began squabbling and fighting over honour, the Minotaurs were dispatched to deal with them, catching both unawares and absolutely hammering them. Though the Doom Warriors managed to make at least something of a retreat, though in truth it was a rout more than a withdrawal, the Inceptors were not so lucky, being encircled by the Minotaurs and almost wiped out. Relics and ships were confiscated, and only 100 Astartes were left alive. Now you see why the Ultramarines and the Scions of Guilliman are so damn annoyed by it, and honestly, I can't blame them. Following the Maharian heresy and the other incidents around it, the Minotaurs next appear in the records on the hive world Hermetica in Segmentum Solar. After a massive, overwhelming chaos invasion led by the Wordbearers, the Minotaurs arrive with their typical overwhelming force to lift the siege on the beleaguered world. Unfortunately, despite absolutely butchering the Chaos Horde and forcing the commanding Dark Apostle to retreat to the warp before reinforcement from Necromunda had even arrived, the Minotaurs' advance was heedless of civilian structures and casualties. We don't have a read on figures, but the amount of innocent Imperial citizens caught in crossfire or otherwise run through by the Minotaurs must have been obscene, and the main cathedral complex, an ancient holy site, suffered heavy damage in the final battles. Following this success, the next stop we know of was the Bada War, a battle that probably did no one involved in it any favours if we're being honest. The Minotaurs themselves didn't enter immediately into the war that saw the Astral Claws eventually become the Red Corsairs, but when they did, they made one heck of a difference. Their most famous action was likely eliminating fellow Cursed Founded chapter, the Lamenters, from the Renegade side, luring them into a trap by attacking their fortress monastery and wiping a huge amount of them out before they eventually surrendered. They weren't involved in the final battles in the fall of Badav itself, as that fell almost entirely to the Star Phantoms, but their last known involvement was the recovery of Loyalist gene seed alongside the Salamanders on the world of Lambton. Finally, there's their most recent conflict that we know of, aside from the one where they got all their gene seed tainted by the Death Guard anyway. In our recent log on Rogue Traders, I made mention of a place called the Orpheus Sector, sadly not named after the rogue trader of the same name who discovered it long ago. When the Necrons of the Maynarch dynasty either awakened or otherwise made their presence known, they struck hard, obliterating the entire Angels Revenant chapter by reducing their fortress monastery to ash. The Imperial response was, perhaps typically for the Imperium, horrendously slow, focused entirely on the defense of the Amarar system and including the entirety of the Minotaurs, as usual, and over 20 million members of the Astra Militarum, along with even more Astartes. The Battle of Amarar on the ground did not include the Minotaurs, as their forces were committed to the war in space in a daring strike to assassinate the Necron Overlord. It did not go well. The Minotaurs suffered exceptionally heavy losses both on approach and in the fighting on board the tomb ship. That said, they were sort of maybe successful. Both the Minotaurs commander and the Overlord ended up spaced into the void, and through the sacrifice of a battle barge, the capital ship of the Necrons was destroyed, which meant the fleet retreated and their ground forces with them. Though they did win the Battle of Amarar, the Orphean War has yet to be won by the Imperium or the Necrons, to the point that the Imperiums concluded it would take a massive crusade to win it. As a result, because they don't have the time to get the resources needed together, the Minotaurs have instead been tasked by the High Lords with conducting exterminatus on the entire sector. Sounds severe, but then again this is the Imperium. Anything goes. The Minotaurs are led by a chapter master with a dark, well-earned reputation. Asterion Moloch, the brazen warlord and the satrap of the Daedalus crater. We do not know at what time he became chapter master, as is typical for the Minotaurs, that information is rather lacking. Some in fact believe that Moloch is not one individual, but instead an inherited name and personality backed up by engrammatically enforced memories so that the mystique of the individual is never lost. The reason for this is the 7 incidents over the past 5 centuries, which is already quite a long time for a Space Marine, that Moloch has been recorded as killed in action and then later mysteriously recovered. I mean, he might have survived all those incidents, including being vented into space at the end of the Battle of Amara, but I find it unlikely somehow, even with his extensive cybernetics. Regardless of whether he is one Astartes or many in succession, Moloch has certainly gained a reputation from his exploits, and truthfully, it's not a reputation I want to have. Whilst undoubtedly a skilled warrior, having taken down personally multiple powerful enemies in the past, both treacherous and alien, it is said he doesn't just kill, but he takes pleasure in it. I mean, this may actually be typical for Space Marines, but the fact it's notable for Moloch makes me think he really enjoys it. However, let that take nothing away from his mind as both strategist and warrior. Assuming he's survived for 500 plus years, well, you just don't live that long without being extremely adept and rather savvy. He will spend his times outside of battle aboard the Daedalus crater's maze-like halls, because of course the leader of the Minotaurs makes his base in the heart of a flippin' labyrinth. I mean, symbolism much? There he will surround himself with data and information, analysing the statistics of wars unfolding below to ensure his chapter's continued success, or just getting them to the next one. Once he enters the fray, however, Moloch becomes truly dangerous. Clad in Tartarus pattern Terminator armour, Moloch will often be found smashing into melee on the front lines, accompanied by his Terminator Honor Guard and wielding a weapon known as the Black Spear. This is a powerful melee weapon incorporating a powerful laser. There's no true evidence for it, but it is said it once belonged to the Adeptus Custodes, maybe because of its similarity to their Guardian Spears in terms of function, but we're not sure. Perhaps if Moloch has a favoured foe, it would have to be other Space Marines. A common use of the Minotaurs is dealing with non-chaotic Space Marines who are either a problem or outright renegades. Just look at the Euxian incident and the Badab War if you want evidence of that. Moloch views these wayward, some might say former, brothers as the ultimate foe. Skilled and worthy combatants, a true test of his forces, as well as deserving the punishment said forces will inevitably dish out. It is these battles that of course win the Minotaurs the most renown, and maybe even the most fear and infamy. An Asterian revels in the dark talk surrounding his mythos. He must be unwavering in his loyalty, but if he were to wander, he would become a truly dangerous problem for the Imperium. There are not many other known Minotaurs besides Moloch, though we do know the seeming head of their chaplains, Reclusiarch Ivanus Encomi. As an aside, their apothecaries are known as intendants, and we actually know of 0 Minotaur librarians, though whether the chapter actually has none is another debate. Encomi seems to be a very polarising individual in terms of personality. He doesn't speak much, instead observing with a keen eye, but when he does deign to open his mouth, it reveals the fiery oratory common to all chaplains, with the Reclusiarch being compared to the Ecclesiarchy's best as a speaker. It was that first aspect that perhaps prompted Moloch to send Encomi as the Minotaur's representative in the Badab War's Loyalist War Council. Much like his brothers who kept their distance from the other Loyalists, I doubt the Reclusiarch spoke much on this council and instead chose simply to observe and report to his lord. When called to war against the forces of Huron, Encomi was instrumental. He commanded a boarding assault that helped lead to the elimination of the Lamenters from the war, and he led a raid into the Maelstrom and the world of Shaprius that helped expose the atrocities of the Astral Claws. He next appeared against the renegade chapter known as the Night Reapers, who went rogue following a form of exile due to performing exterminatus on a shrine world. Though we do not know if he was present in the final battle known as the Perrin Cross incident where the renegades were believed destroyed by the Minotaurs and Grey Knights, he was involved in an earlier battle at Gethetris that saw his Crozius Arcanum shattered by a Thunderhammer. However, either from the salvaged pieces of his former weapon and or recovered Night Reaper relics, Encomi forged a new weapon, the Crozius Arcanos with a built-in grenade launcher. Finally, though his reputation is only likely to grow over the coming years, I wish to mention Hamath Kratos, currently a sergeant in the 9th Company of the Minotaurs, but on a rapid rise through the ranks. A proficient user of the tried and trusted heavy bolter, Kratos' ascension was already underway by the time of the Orphean War against the Necrons. but his actions early in it will have certainly captured the attention of his superiors. Tasked with the defense of a fueling station under attack by flushed-out Eldari corsairs, Kratos led half of his company in a masterpiece of defense for such dense terrain, though it would come at a hefty cost. Killing zones and crossfires were constructed using the plant civilians as bait for the Eldari, and with only a few hours past, hundreds of Xenos were slain. As for the civilians, 60% casualties, a number considered incredibly praiseworthy by the higher-ups, which should tell you just how little the Minotaurs likely care for the lives of the Imperium's people. They and the Salamanders would get on famously, I can see it already. Whether the recent Death Guard attack on the Minotaurs left a hole in the command structure is unknown, but regardless, assuming he still lives, I suspect Hamath Kratos will find himself in the upper echelons of the chapter before too long. So end the tales of the Minotaurs. Whilst they are perhaps a lesser-known chapter amongst the legends that are the Adeptus Astartes, let it never be said that the Minotaurs are not a fearsome foe to face. Their brutal nature and their actions against their enemies has earned them a dark reputation even amongst their allies, but with their supposed ties to the High Lords of Terror and their surprisingly high-tech war gear, I doubt they'll be targeted for reprisal much, if at all, if said allies have any sense. One thing is for certain, given the mindset of Asterian Moloch. If you're a Space Marine and your chapter goes rogue, pray the Minotaurs are not dispatched to deal with you. Now, I wish to take something of a trip back in time for our next log. Recently, we discussed the Regiment of Renown within the Astra Militarum, as well as the overarching organisation. However, this was not the original state of the human armed forces within the Imperium. Whilst there may not be as much to say on its predecessor, it should serve as a good history lesson for those who wish to know where their armies came from, as well as finally closing the book on the armies in the Horus Heresy. For now, thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.